Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how you can create this music visualizer in Blender. If you are interested, you can get the file on Gumroad for $1 via the link in the description. So let's get started. First let's select the cube and go to the modifiers and add a subdivision modifier. I'm going to set this to 6, but you can of course go lower if you want. Now let's apply it and add a displace modifier. The coordinates set it to object and the direction to Z, but you can of course choose any direction that you like. Now let's add an empty and again select the sphere, select the empty here and now press new. Click on this button right here, set it to clouds and set the size to 2. And now if we move, rotate or scale the empty, the displace modifier will move with it. Now let's hit Shift A and add a plane. By the way, hide the cube and also hide it in the rendered view. If you don't see this option right here, you can go up here and enable it. Now let's select the plane, go to geometry nodes. You can of course close this window if you like, we won't need it, and press new. Now let's delete the group input and add a grid. Set the vertices to anything that you like. I'm going to set it to 200 and set the size to 2.9. Let's connect it to the geometry. Now add a transform node and an instance on points node. This one. Now let's add a cube, connect it to the instance, and as you can see this is not what we want, so set the size to 0.025. And now set the scale here on the X and Y to 4.3. Now click on the cube and drag it here. And there's also another way you can do this. I'm going to undo this. You can click on this pin here. So if you select something else, you will still have the geometry nodes tree here. So let's just drag it in. I'm going to click on it again so that it's not pinned anymore, because we won't need that anyway. Now drag this down, duplicate the transform node and make sure that the scale is set back to 1. Plug the geometry into geometry, and now let's add a raycast node. Plug the geometry into the target geometry. Now let's add a math node and duplicate it. Set the first one to multiply and plug the hit distance into the first socket. Now type in -1 and plug the value into the first socket again. And now let's add a separate XYZ and plug the Z into the value. And also plug the location into the vector and set this to subtract. Now add a map range and plug the value into the value. Set the from max to 10 and also the to max. Add a combine XYZ. Plug the result into the Z. Move this over. Add a set position node, plug it in here, and plug the offset into the vector. Now let's plug the is hit into the selection and the hit position in the position. And as you can see, now we get this. Since we haven't added any music yet, it won't change if we play now. I mean if we press play. Now let's hit Shift A and set material. Now let's create the material and select the material here. I'm going to show you how I created the material after we added the music. So now let's go back to layout mode and select the empty. Now if we move it, as you can see, it will behave just like the cube, just that we only see this. Now let's select the plane, R, X and 180, so that it is on the top. Now let's select the empty and drag the timeline up. Make sure that you are on frame 1 and go to the graph editor. Now let's press I to keyframe the scale. Click on the drop down here and make sure that everything is selected. Click on key and bake sound to F curves. Now go to the folder where your sound is located and double click on it. If you press play, you will see that it will generate the movement, but we don't have any sound. So I'm going to show you how to add the sound. Just go up here to the plus sign, video editing, and Shift A, sound, and add the sound. Now if we press play, you will see that we also have sound now. And as you can see, the end frame is still 250. If you want to have the entire song animated, just press A and delete on the numpad, and the X marks the end of the song. Now I'm not going to render the full song for the sake of this tutorial. I'm just going to render to frame 600. Now let's drag this down and do the camera setup and the lighting. Press Ctrl Alt 0 to go into camera view, and let's position it somewhere around here. Now before we do the lighting, we should probably do the shading, so I'm going to show you that now. So let's go to shading, camera view. Now let's select the plane, and I'm going to create a simple gold material. Let's add a color ramp, set the black to something like this, and the white to something similar, but just a little darker, like this for example, and connect it to the base color. Set it all the way to 1, the metallic, and the roughness to 0.27. By the way, let's save this if you haven't already. Now let's select the color ramp and press Ctrl T. You can delete the image. By the way, this is only going to work if you have the Node Wrangler add-on installed. You can go up there and under preferences just type in Node Wrangler and enable it. It comes with Blender by default. Now let's plug the object into the vector and add a noise texture. I mean a Musgrave texture first. Set the scale to 400, the detail to 16 and the dimension to 0. Now let's plug the vector into the normal, add a noise modifier, I mean a noise texture, sorry. Set the scale to 12, the detail to 16, and now let's add a bump node. set the strength to 0.008, and we don't really have to do more for the shader. Of course you can change it however you like. Now let's go back to layout mode and go to rendered view. I'm going to use circles. Now under the world properties, go to color and select sky texture. Set air, dust and ozone to 3 and the strength to 0.2 for now. Also set the sun elevation to 7. Now let's select the light, and where is it? It's here. Move it over, go into camera view, G set, move it down, like this. And let's move it over here. You can move it on the X and Y axis by pressing G Shift Z. And make it a sunlight. Set the strength to 1 and rotate it like this and make it more of a yellow color. Maybe let's make it a little stronger. I think something around 40 or 30 would look good. I'm going to leave it at 30 for now. Now duplicate it and again G Shift Z, move it over here and R Z to rotate it on the Z axis like this. And now go to the strength and divide it by 2. Now duplicate it again and G, Y, and now G, X. Go into top view and rotate it like this. By the way, this light setup is called a 3-point light setup, and I actually like to use it a lot. Now for the render settings, I set the max samples to 128, and something that I like to do is check denoise and set it to optics, because I think that's better, but that will only work for NVIDIA GPUs. Now let's go to compositing and make sure this is checked, and also this denoising data. As you can see, I have this simple setup here with the denoise node and all this plugged in. Now let's see what it looks like, and I think this looks nice. The only thing I'm going to change is under the output settings I'm going to set the frame rate to 30, which I recommend you do too, and set an output folder. I'm going to create a new folder, call it music, and also the files music. If you put an underscore after the name, it will automatically assign a number to it. So let's click accept and change it from PNG to JPEG and set the quality to 100%. Now here under the render properties, let's go to film and check transparent. Now let's go back to layout mode. As you can see, all this is transparent now, but since we set it to JPEG, it's just gonna be black. So if you want it to be truly transparent, you will need to leave it at PNG. I just prefer to use JPEG because the file sizes are smaller. Now before we render the animation, I'm going to go back to geometry nodes and select the plane and press Ctrl D and clean this up a little more. You can of course just leave it as it is. I just like to have it a little more clean. I'm going to skip this part. Now if you want to have the controls here in the modifier, in the output attributes, I'm also going to show you how you can do that. And for that we are going to need the group input. So add that and put it here. And depending on which values you want to control from here, you can just plug this in. Not everything though, as it seems. Oh, sorry. You need to plug these in. So I want to plug in the transition and rotation and scale of the cube. Now let's press N and label it. Go to group and name it cube transition and cube rotation and cube scale. Now I also want to plug in the size of this cube. I'm just going to call it cube grid scale. And I'm also going to plug in the size and vertices of the grid. As you can see, I just made a little mistake here. I called this the cube grid, although it's the cube object, so I'm going to rename that. I'm going to name this cube object, and also these two cube object. If you want to remove one of these inputs, you can just select them here and press the minus button. Now like I said, I'm going to name the grid as well. The last thing that I plugged in was the material, and now if we go back, we have all of these values here. Now let's render the animation, and after that I'm going to show you how I can compile the separate images into one video with music. After it finished rendering, let's hover over here, over the location, and press Ctrl C to copy it. Now let's go back to the video editing tab, and as you can see, when I edit the music, for some reason it edited on frame 2, so let's move it back to frame 1. And hit Shift A, image sequence, paste in the location and delete the name of the separate images and hit enter. Now press A and hit enter again, and now we have all the images in here. Now let's go up here and set it to FFmpeg video. You can rename the video, but I'm going to leave it at music underscore. Now go to encoding, MPEG 4, and under output quality set it to high quality, and audio set it to MP3. And now let's hit render animation. So that's it with the tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you did, please press like. If you didn't, press dislike. And I'll see you next time.